for everyone. We're coming back to the second segment of this second day of the eighth regional platform for disaster risk reduction for the Americas and the Caribbean. We would like to specifically greet all of those that are participating virtually through the Hopping platform. And we would like to remind you that you have the option that is called Contact Network. This is available for everyone. And in order to use this functionality, you have to go to the network icon, click on join, and to leave the session, you should click on the um, leave session button. You can do this if you are following this virtually and in person. Remember that you can not only send your questions for the panel of participants, but you can also start voting on the polls. This is really important because in the talk that we're going to have in a few minutes, you can all send your questions and answer the polls that you have available on the platform. I would also like to remind you that 50 members of the women members of the Risk Reduction Network they are developing an observatory in order to assess the incorporation of the gender issue in this conference. So let's start with urban risk reduction, local leadership towards a multi-sectoral and multi-level governance. This is organized by the UN Development um, Department and by the Regional Office for the Americas and the Caribbean. Ronald Jackson would be our chairman. He has a master's degree in environmental management from the University of the Occident of the Western uh, Indies, and he has been in charge at regional and international level of this issue. He is right now the head of the Risk Reduction UN Program for Development. Before this position at UNDP, he was the executive director for the Emergency and Disaster Department for the Caribbean, and also as a general director of the Office for Preparedness for Disasters of Jamaica. So we would like to ask him to come to the podium and to start this parallel session. So please, Ronald, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Master of Ceremonies, colleagues, and friends. The impact of disaster is increasing in the whole world and complexity and intensity, especially regarding the number of people that have been affected, that has increased in the last few decades. The Latin American and Caribbean region reflects that systemic concentration that we have. And as we wrote in the comments in the report, we can see that between 1997 and 2017, there were many more disasters in the world, and the losses from those disasters were also uh, bigger. So that means that the risks have increased, and the policies that we need to devise in order to tackle these risks are also they have to be greater, especially in urban areas. And that means
of risk. More specifically, Latin America and the Caribbean is the most urbanized region in the world, with about 81% of the population already living in cities. In consequence, our collective ability to deliver the sustainable development goals will depend largely on the performance of towns and cities. In the Americas, the Caribbean disasters, in the Americas and the Caribbean, disasters are affecting more and more the urban areas, particularly small and medium-sized cities and municipalities. which were hit by 80% of the urban events between 1995 and 2015, according to the Regional Assessment Report of 2021. Unplanned urbanization processes lead to an increasing concentration of risk in households, livelihoods, informal settlements, and in socioeconomic assets. Disaster risks are closely linked to several other challenges, including inequalities, social cohesion, displacement, and citizen security. In synthesis, a complex set of social and economic processes combine in cities to create risks that interact, producing disasters with cascading impacts, undermining development progress, and hampering the aspirations of urban residents. With an estimated 90% of all reported COVID-19 cases occurring in urban areas, the high population concentration and interconnectedness of urban agglomerations make them hotspots for crisis, multiple shocks, and risk of all kinds and hues. It requires comprehensive and joined-up efforts to build resilience, transcending sectors, stakeholders, to address underlying socioeconomic and institutional risk drivers. Colleagues, in 2021, UNDP developed an assessment of 16 major global urban resilience initiatives implemented over the last decade. It revealed that interesting progress was made in developing analytical frameworks and diagnostic tools and to support city governments on risk and vulnerability assessments, resilience planning, development of projects and accessing finance, access to data and data management, and convening knowledge exchange. However, there is still a vast proportion of unmet demand coming from smaller cities, ones we refer to as second and third tier cities, in many of the countries and regions worldwide. After a decade of urban resilience intervention, there is still a long way to run in making cities more resilient. In this session, we will learn from the experiences of a remarkable group of panelists. Please note, two of our panelists are coming from municipalities, and I will introduce them shortly, and two panelists are coming from national level institutions. I'm happy and delighted to be joined by Javier Pava, who is online. I hope Javier is online with us. He's the Director General of the National Disaster Risk Management Unit and head of the Columbia Adaptation Fund. Mr. Pava is a geological engineer with specialization in risk assessments and disaster prevention from the University of Los Andes. He was the creator and director of the Bogota District Institute of Risk Management and Climate Change, and has also served as an international consultant for UNDRR, CAN, and the World Bank. On stage, we have with us Luis Bonilla, lead of Strategic Alliances and Programs in Resilient Cities Network, an economist and a master's in Latin American Studies. Among others, Luis has been director of TECO International, an advisor of the Minervi, consultant of international organizations such as Clasco, Eurosocial Plus, and Oxfam. He has an extensive experience in Latin America and the Caribbean region and has been part of the group of experts for a regional action plan for the implementation of the new urban agenda. I'm also pleased from the local level. I did say to you, we have a couple mayors or local officials joining us. Miriam Urzoa, Risk Management and Control and Civil Protection Secretary of the Government of Mexico City, and winner of the first Sasakawa Award 2022 for her contribution to urban risk management in Latin America and the Caribbean. Miriam has 40 years of professional experience in disaster risk management and urban and environmental management, providing technical advice to governments, the United Nations agencies, and the World Bank. Miriam is an architect and has a postgraduate studies in urbanism from UNAM and the University of Chile. We also have with us here in the room Angela Henriquez, Deputy Mayor of the Municipality of Santo Domingo. She's a lawyer and a journalist specializing in community leadership. Ms. Henriquez is an active member of various social movements such as the Green March, Pro Consumidor, CESODECO, the defense of the environment and natural resources such as water. The deputy mayor is a member of the National Directorate, the National Political Commission, and the coordinator of the Council of the province of Santo Domingo of her Alliance Peace Party. Online, we have Francine Barron, a lawyer from the University of Wolverhampton and the University of London. She's currently the CEO of the Climate Resilience Execution Agency of Dominica, referred to as CREED, which supports the implementation of Dominica's Climate Resilient Recovery Plan. From 2014 to 2019, Francine served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs and of CARICOM Affairs for the government of Dominica. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to pose the first question to Luis and Francine. What are the main factors in your context contributing to augmenting urban risk conditions within the region?
Muchas gracias, Ronald, y un gusto estar.
Thank you, Ronald. It's a pleasure to be here today sharing this forum with these panelists. And also it's great to be here. Within our Resilient City Network, we identify risk as the interconnection or the way in which the following factors interconnect: exposure to chronic tensions and exposure to severe impacts. This risk, let's say, this connection between tension and impact exposure, as Ronald has correctly said, has its main cause in cities. Latin America is the most highly urbanized region in the world. And then there are other factors because of time limit. I would like to focus on inequality and how inequality throughout the Latin American region affects people and in a way is a factor that also increases risk. Why do we believe this? Well, it's important to address inequality in order to build resilience. Why? First of all, because inequalities limit growth and prosperity, common growth and prosperity. Of course, inequality disproportionately affects the most vulnerable, the poorest communities, informal settlements, etc. But also the CEPAL has identified that inequalities usually affect human development in every city and societies because they are important factors. Also, cities are potential social disasters. Growing and persisting inequalities might lead to disasters. And we have witnessed this in our region in the last few years. We've seen how we have had social outbreaks, violence, riots, etc. So there is a strong interconnection between this and our fragmented societies. And third, inequalities also increase the effects of severe events. So unequal and fragmented societies are less prepared in order to face severe events such as earthquakes, floodings, hurricanes, and climate change effects in general. So we need to be ready for prosperity. But the thing is that being a potential disaster area and increasing the effects of social impact means that inequality is one of the main determinants that we must consider for building resilience. Because if we reduce inequality, we build inclusion, integration, reflection, capacity to respond, which are all necessary to build resilience in our cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. Francine, what are your thoughts on the question?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to be part of this conversation this afternoon. We are seeing more and more an increasing movement of people from rural areas into urban areas. mostly in search of jobs and other opportunities. And part of that movement is attributable to moving away from agriculture, which has traditionally been the mainstay for rural communities. So there is an influx of persons into urban areas, which is putting increased pressure on those areas, which are usually slow to adapt and absorb the changing demands on resources. Climate change and its impacts is one of the greatest challenges, resulting in internal displacement of persons and a greater impetus to persons to seek out urban areas for employment, better housing, and other opportunities. And this migration to urban areas is sometimes fueled by low investments in rural communities. And that really speaks to the question of inequalities that was raised by Lewis a while ago. Urban risks are amplified if our urban institutions are either non-existent or weak, or if there are too many actors in play without a clear line of authority and commitment to act. Do we have strong leadership at the community level? There must be clear political will to address the issues of vulnerabilities and risks in a coordinated manner. In many instances, there's a lack of risk management mechanisms and therefore no clear plan to identify and develop solutions in a targeted manner. So issues such as poor urban planning and underdeveloped infrastructure, whether related to housing, roads, drainage, and such, contribute to urban risks. Also, the lack of employment opportunities, particularly for the youth, is a major issue that results in social discord, increasing crime and violence. Access to financing is also a very limiting factor. Do we have the finances necessary to make the changes that will lessen our vulnerabilities? Do we have in place effective early warning systems? Do we have at the local level a proper working disaster plan? Are we able to put in place mitigating measures to minimize risk? How knowledgeable are urban residents on the challenges that they face? Are they educated on ways in which they can reduce their risks, whether to disasters or otherwise? How effectively are they engaged? So these are just some of the areas that we can highlight as issues that are impacting urban risk conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Francine. Thank you, Lewis. You've raised some very interesting points there on inequalities, around the presence of risk management in urban centers, around the pressures on the urban livelihoods, which is driving demand in the city center. We've included the audience in this process, and certainly they've also answered the question, which are the three main challenges for urban risk management in the Americas and the Caribbean. And financing is coming up quite strongly, but also a point that Francine made about participation, citizen participation, partnership, as well as better planning, which we've heard from many of the speakers. I want to now turn my attention to our next two panelists, one online and one here. So for Miriam and Javier, what capacities do you think local and national government should strengthen to move towards comprehensive, inclusive, and systemic risk management? I'll start with Javier this time. I'm going to take a response first from our online participant, and then I'll come to you, Miriam. Javier.
Bueno, el gobierno nacional, los gobiernos
national governments have a specific sectoral and territorial role, but they also must guarantee that autonomy and reduce they need to reduce inequalities so that every small, medium-sized and large city develop inclusion strategies. This is a commitment by the national governments to guarantee autonomy, to guarantee participation mechanisms, to guarantee the involvement of communities in decision making with actions that will allow us to implement all of this. So they need to forge alliances or enter into partnerships with larger capacity cities. You know, large cities and small cities, and sometimes smaller cities need further support. We believe that creating a network of cities might be very useful. and it's necessary to create nodes to allow for this articulation. Large cities work in a very different way from medium-sized or smaller cities. We see that many smaller cities have technical or financial capacity or administrative capacity that is much weaker. They usually need the support of the national government. Medium-sized cities tend to have better capacities, but management services are really basic, and they need to articulate their work with other cities. And larger cities that do have the necessary capacities, they tend to just work by themselves, and they do not value relationships with other cities. So we need to see how we distinguish those territory-based aspects. Another important aspect, territories, and this has to do with hydrographic basins, ecosystems. We must understand, when it comes to climate change, how they behave and which are the actions to take. National governments must provide the necessary elements so that people can work from each area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Javier.
Aló.
Miriam, over to you.
Muchísimas gracias, Ronald. Yo creo que la pregunta es
Thank you very much, Ronald. I think the question is very clear, and it has to do with which capacities must be developed by local, regional, national governments in order to improve risk management, okay? With any title you may want to use, but how do we make progress? Okay, so the first step is institutional capacity. We need strong institutions that have a clear legal framework, a clear regulatory framework, a clear structural framework, and a clear programmatic framework. These are the tools that we will have as institutions in order to address risk management topics. Mexico City in particular, we have a vision, and that's what we decided to do first. It's a vision and a mission that have to do with building a city that is more careful, more prepared, more resilient, more humane. Therefore, we need strong institutions that actually can rise up to the challenges and work with basic risk management. First of all, we need to strengthen then institutional capacity. That's number one. Number two, something that we must consider are the human resources that we have in order to address these topics. Human resources need to be professional and properly trained. In general, the people that work with civil protection issues are not necessarily professionals. It has happened to us, for instance, in Mexico, that some people that maybe don't do other things, they work with civil protection or risk management. We shouldn't have that. We need experts. We need professionals. We know people who know about the topic. We also need sufficient financial resources in order to do our work and to serve our population. If our budgets are reduced instead of increased, then we cannot really serve the population in these essential topics such as risk management, which actually entail prevention. Then there's material resources in order to help people when there are emergencies, events, incidents. Every day, all of us working in this area need these resources. Also, we need a cross-cutting management. Let's keep this in mind. We need to engage every government agency from cities or regions. We cannot work on our own. So depending on the characteristics of each agency or department, they need to be included in our work. How? We need to create protocols. These protocols mean that every agency or department has a specific task regarding risk management. Also, they need to have differential responsibilities, but they need to work with us as well. Risk management needs to be a coordinated area. This is not a direct operation area, it's a coordination area. We need to, for instance, create a system, and this is what we have done, what we did in Mexico, especially in Mexico City, risk prevention brigades, together with a social sector. And this program works as a system, and it might be easy to say, but risk prevention brigades in cities entail creating 849 brigades according to the 849 areas in the city and the 70 territorial combinations in the city. We need to reach them so that risk management can trickle down, okay? It shouldn't just remain in this superstructure. We need to strengthen our work with the private sector. This is something that we need to do. By way of example, I can tell you that in Mexico, we signed an agreement and we're strengthening our relations with the private sector. And the private sector has actually helped us with capacity building, and this will be implemented in 2 weeks' time. We're going to visit the most vulnerable sites in the city so that the people that, will never train in the area of risk prevention or management will do so. Also, we need to consolidate our connection with the academia. We do have a specific chat, including resilient universities. We're harnessing their knowledge and experience. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Javier and Miriam. Quite extensive reflections there, and I particularly like I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Balancing the natural with the anthropogenic systems, which Javier touched on the environmental comment, and the issue related to smaller cities and the variability in their capacity. And Miriam speaking about institutional capacity. Really pointing to the fact that development is founded on strong institutions. So if we're talking about resilience within the cities, we have to look at the institutions and the human resources and a number of other very important issues there, which is taking risk management out of the administrative domain, but also bringing the wider sectoral actors and communities into this. You've had your say, our audience here in the room and also online. You've given us your perspectives, and you've ranked the presence of academia and experts as your number one area for strengthening if we want to promote better urban resilience and risk management. Neighborhood organizations, which I think aligns quite nicely with Miriam's point about the prevention brigades. We can link that to her ideas there. And of course, modernization and new ideas, innovation. How do we bring innovation, not just from a technological standpoint, into the process, and then proximity with the private sector? I want to now turn back to our two panelists, two of our three panelists here in the room. I want to address my next question to Angela and to Luis. Which potentials and opportunities can be used to streamline risk management processes at the local levels? And I will start with you, Angela.
Sí, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much. We are very grateful for this invitation to this plenary session. And this session in particular regarding risk reduction, disaster risk reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean. From the Dominican Republic, we are here from the Dominican Republic. And we are here to learn, as we have already done since yesterday. And also, we are learning how to interact with all these voices, these diverse voices from Latin America that have been participating since yesterday. Regarding your question, Ronald, thank you very much. We believe that local governments can implement several processes and initiatives that need to be directly connected to local leadership. It is clear that those initiatives must be connected with the local leaders, the groups of neighbors in the local government of East Santo Domingo, which is a municipality that has 1,200,000 inhabitants approximately. We have tried to include communities and also the people that work there and that are up in arms and have to struggle in their everyday lives. So what we did was organize over 1,500 groups of neighbors or meetings of neighbors. There we have someone responsible for risk management. Also, we are promoting training because, as our colleagues have said, our fellow panelists, without training, not just training local leaders, but also population at large, the message will never be conveyed. Ideas, initiatives, they will never reach the most vulnerable communities. In that case, we need to make the most of communication means at every level. We need to use a language that actually reaches people. We shouldn't be too complicated or use technical words. We also believe that we need to train people that can multiply this message on risk management. There's something else which is very important. We need to work in a coordinated manner. Institutions shouldn't just believe that the work is to be done only by institutions through bureaucracy. We need to interact with people in the territories on a daily basis. Also, we need to get to know those territories and how organized they are. For instance, we have just enacted a law, the land use law, that had been around for many years without being enacted, and now it has been enacted. We also have a strategic plan and a budget. However, it must be said that this budget needs to be better address these areas. Also, we need to see how the local budget will target the people's risk management needs. Also, and very importantly, we need to remember that locally we can also work in a coordinated manner with the institutions that are more advanced than ourselves, and also with other countries that have further developed in the area of risk management. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to mention three advances that we have seen in the region, which provide us with an opportunity to talk about resilience and risk management in a more targeted way. First of all, we now better understand the complexity and systemic risk entailed by cascade crisis. Nowadays, it's very difficult to, separate climate change, economic crisis, migrations, etc. It's like everything has to do with everything, and this is like our perspective. This opens up an opportunity for reforms. My colleagues have talked about, for instance, training, funding, institutional capacity building. And this has to adapt to this complexity posed by the systemic risk we experience nowadays. That was number one. Number two, interesting and valuable efforts and solid efforts have been made regarding resilience governance, and this has to do with this systemic idea. We need to reform resilience governance in order to include every level, sector, and stakeholder that works within a city. This will allow us to work in a more coordinated and efficient manner. Miriam, during lunch, shared with us an interesting case, including resilience and risk management in the Constitution of the City of Mexico, the resilience councils that exist in several cities. For instance, the city of Cali is now or will become a special district in Colombia, and it aims to become a smart and resilient city. Therefore, there are initiatives in order to reform governance in relation to resilience and risk. Number three, Latin America has worked very hard and is highly motivated. Local governments are highly motivated because they want to work as a network. Here, the mayor was saying that actually, ultimately, they want to learn from peers from other cities and share experiences. That's very important. For instance, the Making Cities Resilience initiative. Cities want to learn, and they also want to share their learnings with other cities. And I believe that's a major opportunity. Adriana, maybe there are several regions in Making Cities Resilient. I think Latin America is the region that has the most members. Oh, it's the Americans in general. Okay. And that's a great opportunity to strengthen cooperation. So systemic risk, resilience governance capacity, and capacity to work as a network. These are strengths that open up new opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Interesting. We heard about localization. Again, this whole issue of capacity building, cultural transformation, shifting culture and behavior through communication, through education. I think that came out quite well. The risk language, ensuring that we have a simplified risk language for the people we are trying to reach. In the UN, we have a very complex risk language. And so we heard we need to really make sure that we can translate that. The issue of systemic challenges, reforms, and governance, all very important elements coming out in that aspect. And I want to turn to Francine and Miriam with my next question. And it is as follows: how to enhance the role of community actors, civil society, and the private sector in urban risk management. And as you can see on the screen, whilst we're hearing from our panelists, you are actively engaged in contributing your thoughts to this. So Francine, how to enhance the role of community actors, civil society, and the private sector in urban risk management?
Thank you, Ronald. A few thoughts or suggestions. There sometimes seems to be a disconnect or a lack of awareness between the state and civil society and the private sector It almost seems sometimes that they're working at cross purposes. We should consider the development of an urban risk management strategy and action plan that will look in a comprehensive way at all issues affecting urban areas and that put its occupants at risk. And we should really include in that strategy and in that plan specific roles for civil society and the private sector and private actors. There needs to be greater engagement by the state with civil society and non-state actors, because we need to have a whole of society approach to the very real issues that are confronting us, whether they be disaster risks, issues of resilience, unemployment, overcrowding, poverty, what have you, any of those risks. No one person or group has all the answers or all the ideas and solutions. So we must have a system for the sharing of information and best practices and be willing to listen and engage. That might involve, for example, regular sessions in person or virtually that allows for a cross-fertilization of ideas. And it may involve the development of protocols to govern interaction within the state and civil society and private sector and amongst themselves. It may also require the training and capacity building so that we can have more informed contributions and participation. And we may need to encourage the formation of interest groups for better organized interventions. They also need to understand as well that they play a vital role in ensuring a more resilient community. So that includes in ensuring that their business practices do not harm the environment, in creating opportunities for employment, in setting examples of conservation, and in having innovative approaches towards risk reduction. What we should ultimately seek to create is a better relationship with all groups in society so that we're approaching problems with a unity of purpose and maximizing the use of the limited resources that we have to be able to do the most good. Thank you.
Thank you, Francine. Miriam, over to you.
Muchísimas gracias, Ronald.
Thank
A ver,
you.
yo comparto totalmente la última parte.
I fully agree with Francine, what Francine said in her last part. We need to work with training in the social private sector. We need to reach everyone. That's number one. Number two, there are some tasks that we need to perform in order to really enhance the role of these stakeholders. One of them is to work by developing risk knowledge. And that's absolutely essential for those of us working in the area. Why? So that we can provide more reliable information, more timely information, more accurate information. Also, the population in general should actually, feel reassured when you discuss these topics with them. Also develop tools and, for instance, early warning systems. And these are basic tools in order to do this kind of work. In the city of Mexico, we started working in the administration 4 years ago. At that time, we started developing a risk atlas. Nowadays, it includes over 2,000 updated information layers. This is information that is 3 or 4 years old, not more than that. And incredibly, nowadays we have around 80 million downloads, So this atlas actually is reaching so many stakeholders that are actually in charge of helping the city develop, building in the city. So this risk atlas allows them or shows them which the risks are, where they are in the city, so that they don't build there and so that they don't create further vulnerability. We have a multiple early warning system, and this system allows us to provide information to the 16 municipalities in Mexico 6 hours in advance. This is very important. Why? Because, the municipalities can talk to their communities and they can get ready in case there is an event, be it rains, high temperatures, low temperatures, wind, hail, etc. We can now talk to citizens, we can interact with them by disseminating this information. I was talking about this at the beginning, a dissemination strategy. In the city of Mexico, it's easier said than done. We reach 1,300,000 people every day on Twitter. We're providing them with information on an ongoing basis regarding what's happening in the city in all matters related to risk. We are sharing with them this concept and language of risk management. I think we need to create and promote these brigades. I was telling you about these community risk prevention brigades. We are also working with first aid brigades, simulation drill brigades, logistics brigades, communication brigades. We have chat groups, group chats with the universities where they share the studies with us. And they are useful for us because we can use them to work with the population. Also, programs shared with the private sector. Also, finally, agreements for new real estate developments that are only approved after a risk assessment project. No new development can be started in Mexico if it is not approved throughout a single process. We have the mobility department, the urban development and housing department. All these departments need to provide their approval to all new developments. There's something else I wanted to say before and I forgot. In summary, I believe that from the administration, we need to prioritize risk management over emergency management. That is essential. Second, we need to standardize concepts. We need to use the same words and understand the same things. What is vulnerability? What is threat? What is hazard? What's risk? What is disaster? What is resilience? Let's use the same language. Something else that is very important that you were mentioning, communication. We need to speak the language of people. Let's get used to that. Let's generate the necessary empathy in order to reach as many people as possible. Finally, just a minute. If we truly work in the area of risk management as we're doing now, then we will have much less damage in our physical assets and in our cities, and much lower financial losses that affect our development and jeopardize our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francine and Miriam. I definitely heard the passion in that response, and I think that's also important. Two leaders, three women leaders. No offense to the gentlemen on the panel, but I'm talking about local leadership. Three women leaders who are demonstrating great passion for this particular issue, and we need that as well as a driving factor in delivering urban resilience. So we heard about this disconnect between the state, civil society, and the private sector, and I really love Francine's recommendation about this urban risk management strategy and action plan that defines very clear spaces for civil society and the private sector to be able to contribute. Again, this issue of engagement and inclusiveness, which is very central to effective development. From Miriam, this whole idea of prioritizing risk management. You offered quite a number of things, including the risk atlas that is open source to key stakeholders. But I really love your impassioned plea about promoting or prioritizing risk management. And we're going to come back to you because this is a very important issue around how we understand what it is we're talking about when we say risk management the prospective and the corrective before we get into the reactive, which is response. We need to promote those two. So you've been also, giving your feedback on these issues, and you've quite clearly stated that the strengthening of local governance is an important element for you when you're looking at the main solutions for urban risk management. You have also planning for the future, very important. I mean, we have to understand that it's not about risk now, but risk in the future. How are our choices today shaping risk in the future, and how are we accounting for them in our longer term planning? And of course, access to safe housing and land, and then community-based early warning systems. I'm now going to turn to Luis and Miriam for my final sets of questions. And I'm going to start with Miriam here, and then ask Luis to chime in afterwards. How can science and technology contribute to encouraging risk management in urban areas? Are we using enough of science and technology in our urban risk management efforts? Over to you, Miriam, first, and then I'll ask Luis to close on this section.
A ver, yo creo que justamente una de las
I believe that one of our shortcomings and something we need to address right now is something that someone mentioned yesterday as well. We need to start, climbing up the stairs of technology. We shouldn't do things by hand anymore. We really need to use technology. And this is why Mexico City has made a huge effort at the beginning of its administration. Finding the resources to actually put together these risk atlas in a place called C5 in Mexico. There, we do have the best possible technology and redundancy. I believe it is essential for us to start addressing these topics, as you are saying, science and technology, and we need to make the most of what the academia and cities develop as well, so that we can improve our management. We need to build labs that will allow us to improve conditions so that we can anticipate what will happen. Mexico is like a multi-threat city. We have everything. We have, of course, quakes that we cannot forecast, but we have a volcano 60 kilometers away. And every day we get warnings that the volcano might erupt at any time. Also, we have the rain season between the 15th of May and the 15th of October. There are torrential rains, especially in August and September. We also have floodings. We have landslides, etc. Science and technology are essential, especially to, forecast this type of severe event. Thank you. I fully agree with the medium. I would like to talk about how, in the area of science and technology, I would like to say that how digitalization, which is part of this, can help cities become more resilient. Digitalization is some sort of layer that, pervades how cities work. And this is an increasing trend. How can we harness this trend to make cities more resilient? This is something that we must consider in the agenda as essential. Why? Because the digitalization of urban economies, governments, etc., allow us to better manage information, to be prepared for the future. Real-time information, integrated information, etc. These are capacities that we can have access to thanks to digitalization, and that help build urban capacities. Also, when there is a disaster or the risk, digitalization helps keep the system in operation. And this was the case with COVID. Digitalized cities, for instance, were more prepared to pay subsidies on keep schools open or conduct prevention campaigns. Digitalization helps keep systems operational when there's a crisis. Also, when digitalization democratizes and it includes every citizen, it also allows us to be more integrated, to build better communities, as I was saying, to be more resilient, which is important to be a resilient city in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. I haven't heard from Javier. So, Javier, do you want to reflect a little bit on this question as well? You're more than welcome.
Te agradezco muchísimo. A ver,
thank you. First of all, regarding science and technology in risk management, we need to focus on who for and what for. The main causes of risk in urban areas have to do with inequalities, fragmentation, and social division. If we create and develop science and technology, we need to make sure that it reduces these gaps, these inequalities and divisions. And many times it's the opposite. Actually, access to science and technology widens the gap. So we need to, sometimes science and technology perpetuates the vulnerability of some people. So science and technology need to be at the service of the entire community. Also, access to information. Every citizen needs to have access to information, every city, every territory. And this has to do with having access to Wi-Fi networks, to technology and information systems that will allow citizens to exchange information and to inform decision-making and also to participate effectively. I truly believe that we need to think about mainly applied science that aims to find solutions to solve risk issues in the various territories. We don't need a science and technology that just favor the same people every time, that it just helps the people that have the capital, that have the resources, and have the means. So quite the opposite, we need to solve that gap. Technology should aim to find solutions that help us adapt. Many societies have done this. They have developed corrective works. These, but sometimes it's a problem because societies just react and they don't plan and they don't think about wealth distribution or land wealth distribution. There are many topics, urban topics, that haven't been addressed yet. Many times we talk about land use, but in urban areas, this has to do with land and the value of land. So as long as there are these huge differences, and then the differences between living in an area or another, then the problems will remain. Here in Colombia, we have made progress in this regard in the area of land use. We have provided information, we have developed risk maps, also risk reduction programs. However, risk situations increase day by day. So we are creating elements that actually reproduce the same risk and vulnerability conditions. So this information actually needs to be used to implement strategic changes in order to redistribute land, to redistribute wealth. And this also has to do with capacity building and guaranteeing real transformation in the territories. I believe that science and technology need to focus on that. Risk management shouldn't just be keeping or preserving what we have, because as long as we protect these situations, we will never solve the problems. And actually, science and technology will, preserve the same conditions. We need to guarantee this. Of course, we need the necessary political will of governments, of communities, so that these rights are protected democratically. And to do that, they need to have access to information. They need also information needs to be democratized. It's a shame to see that in Latin America, we have the same authorities and the same people that work about risk management, and keeping information or having information. It's only a small group of people who are experts, specialized. They only have access to that. We cannot consider ourselves as the owners of science, technology, information, or knowledge. All of this needs to serve communities. It needs to be used massively. To do that, we need to make this information easy, understandable. It should be disseminated, easy to understand. People should have access to it. These are communication strategies in an easy language. You should be able to reach people through art, music, culture, so that we can lead these transformations. Because we're here always saying that risk issues can be handled by experts, specialists, high-level officer institutions. If we keep doing that, that keeps promoting this negative cycle, which we must break away from. I don't agree that in Latin America we should keep doing the same thing, because we won't actually achieve any of our Sendai framework indicators. The situation will remain. And most importantly, today we're facing risk challenges, and also climate change means that we need to fully understand the problems beyond what we have historically done. We have focused on probabilistics, statistics, but we need to break away from structures. So now, because of climate change, we must develop in science and technology.
It was really an interesting discourse. We had two wonderful questions from the audience, and it's a shame that we're unable to really hear from the panelists on this. I mean, it really concerns what can municipal authorities do in at-risk communities where state has limited access and presence. For instance, how do we implement resilience actions in unplanned settlements? And the second one, how can we prevent municipalities from acting as a threat to the resilience of their neighbors? So transboundary issues, for instance, water and flooding management. Very, very important questions that I would have loved to have heard from the panelists. Francine, because this also looks at SIDS and small cities which are struggling with their own resource base, as we heard. But such is the issue. We heard leveraging technology to transform our urban systems. We heard about better management and access to services using digitalization. We heard about creating opportunities for unlocking economic freedoms through digitalization as well. We heard about the issues, the other side of technology, which is the risk inherent in technology. There's technology for good, technology for bad, and the role of technology in widening the gap in inequalities. And we need to pay attention to that, factoring risk in our planning and development. Technology should provide solution that allows us to adapt and to transform. Very important words and insights from our panel of experts. There's much more we have to close, but we're out of time. It was really a pleasure to hear from them. Please give them a round of applause for those participating here on the panel. And our wonderful delegates who are operating online. They don't have the advantage of the pulse in the room. Let's thank them. Thank you so much. And it was my pleasure steering you through the process.
Le agradecemos a Ronald y al resto de los participantes.
Thank you, Ronald, and all the panelists. Thank you in this parallel session, Urban Risk Reduction, Local Leadership Towards Inclusive, Transversal and Multi-Level Governance. Thank you everyone for your participation. Please remember that at the Monte Carlo room, we still have the Ignite stage. Every 15 minutes, colleagues from the region present innovative initiatives regarding disaster risk reduction. We would like to invite you to visit the room. Thank you very much.